Everyone, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We're excited to have you here. It's going to be a great conversation. So I'm Ashwin Kumar. I'm on the startup partnerships team at Stripe. Before Stripe, I was the co-founder of a fintech startup called Sway Finance that went through Y Combinator in 2016. And we're here with Eric Glyman. Eric is the co-founder and CEO of Ramp. Ramp is the only finance automation platform that helps businesses spend less time and money. Today, Ramp is the fastest growing corporate card and bill payment software in America. It comes with best-in-class integrated expense management, reimbursement, accounting automations, and a lot more. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Ramp and maybe users. Prior to Ramp, Eric co-founded Paribus. Paribus is a price tracking app that helps consumers save money on their everyday online purchases. Paribus was acquired by Capital One, where he then led the savings automation team. So thank you so much, Eric, and thanks everyone for coming. Eric, just to start off, the title of this conversation is how to build high velocity teams and produce asymmetric outcomes. Asymmetric outcomes, it's a phrase I know you love to use. What does that actually mean to you?
Totally. And thanks so much for having me today. And I hope for everyone listening, this session is useful. We're going to go through some questions that have been contributed in advance and towards the back go into Q&A. And so sincerely, I hope this is interesting. I think when you say asymmetry, it comes with this notion of look, not all hours, not all outcomes are equal. Just as I hope that these next 45 minutes is hopefully the next most interesting 45 minutes of the day. Not every hour that's on our calendar is going to be just as impactful, drive business outcomes. And I would say for I think a lot of the audience is going to be startup founders, CEOs, leading finance teams. I think fundamentally the job as an allocator of capital and of people, of resources, of focus is to figure out what has a very high return on whether it's investment of dollars, of time, and to cut what doesn't. And last what I'd say is like, when I think about asymmetry, it's very surprising. It's very non-linear. I think back to you had mentioned Paribus. When I first started that company, my previous career was all about hard work and the number of hours you work was how people measured each other. I worked in banking for a bit, and I applied that to the first 6 months of that company. And I just remember our goal at one point was we had to grow 10%. So we had to add 40 users that week. I worked 100 hours, missed the goal. I think we'd added only 35 at the time. And I was very frustrated trying to figure out what could I have done differently. I put in the hours. It wasn't playing out. What was wrong? And my co-founder then and now Kareem said, you know what? I'm just going to post something on Reddit. He posted on our Beer Money, a small forum, and within 12 hours we had 400 users. And so it's all to say, those 100 hours agonizing over trying to get more users didn't matter even nearly as close as the 5 minutes to just post something on Reddit. And I think a lot of startups and running businesses are like that. It's hard to predict what exactly is going to be the outcome. And so just open yourself up to that asymmetry and try to find what really is more impactful. Do more of that. Cut what isn't yielding those outcomes.
Yeah, that's great. It's for the Reddit example. Did you guys look at multiple different things and then tried them all and saw what worked and then double down, or what was the approach there?
Totally. Yeah. So that last business, that the idea was we're going to save you money when things that you buy drop in price. And so it's all about like saving $5 here, $20 there. And so Kareem had known about this subreddit, our Beer Money, which was, I want to make $5 this week so I can go buy an extra beer on the weekend. And so he had heard about it, seen it, and he said, okay, this is going to be the right spot to go and post it. Turned out it worked far better. We didn't realize how large the community was. And so then we later went on, tried to find lots of other subreddits. Turned out some worked great, some didn't. There was a lot with it, but I would say that for us, at least then it had to do with an overlap of that turnout. That was our audience for that last previous company. Certainly not for Ramp, but I think that's just true that where you're going to find what works for businesses isn't just the standard go spend money on Facebook and see what happens. I think trying to understand where your audience is, truly, really experiment with it, and you'll find some nonlinear outcomes like that.
It sounds like once you found what was asymmetric, you doubled down on it, right? You went and said, okay, well, Reddit seems to be a channel. Let's go find a bunch of other subreddits. And that's the other half of this. That seems like it worked well.
Exactly right. And that's just true. I mean, I think even for, almost all businesses, there's going to be characteristics like that, whether it's some people on, if you have a sales team, some techniques are far better at yielding outcomes. Some features that you launch maybe takes 5 minutes, but an hour, but people love it, whereas others takes weeks, don't. And I think put simply, go for the 80-20, go for something that 20% of the time, 80% of the results. I think early on, and I hope even just in general over the course of companies' life, trying to really assess what was the manage what was the input, and how does that compare to the output. And then once you discover the inputs that yield great outputs, focus in on those aggressively. It helps.
Yeah, and absolutely, especially kind of the current market environment. It's getting the highest ROI is kind of almost essential for you to really succeed. So I'm curious about that because I know it's on a lot of people's minds, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And people have told me this is one thing they really wanted to ask is, you're building a high velocity team, but the current state of the market, how do you do that? Or what's your read on kind of how things are going? I know Michael Siebel at YC shared an email to all of the founders. I'm sure a lot of them have read this, and other VCs have come out and said, tighten up the coffers. Yeah, I'm curious what you think about what's going on in the market overall.
I mean, it's pretty interesting, and we have a fairly unique view in this. I mean, we're processing well into the billions of dollars of transactions each year across cards, bill payments, different sectors of the economy. And this is a very different kind of reset than ones in the past. I think that for many small businesses, it's coming towards the later stages, or hopefully later stages of the pandemic. And it's just another Wednesday in June where the P&L is fundamentally the same. Most businesses in the US are profitable. For them, I think things are very normal, but the folks that this has really affected are ones where the cost of capital, of fundraising, is a core component of the market. That's very true for startups. If the public markets can be down in high growth tech stocks by 60-70% over the past 6 months, the market is telling us that the cost of capital has gone way up. Really that hurdle to show a return, you can still spend very efficiently. There are going to be extraordinary companies formed, but that hurdle is much higher. And that's also true with companies that rely on debt. I would say the last other nuance too is, while this is going on, what Apple is doing, the changes with app transparency has reduced the effectiveness for a lot of online advertisers. And so a lot of folks that direct to consumer are being more moderated and careful. I guess what I would say, all this comes back to this notion of whether your business is falls in that category of it's profitable, and you're funding your business through your contribution profit, or it's not yet profitable, it's early, you're working towards it. I think now more than really has been important in many, many years, the efficiency of every dollar and every hour really matters. The market is going to do what it's going to do, but for operators, making sure that you're thinking about, okay, these dollars that I'm deploying that made sense months ago, if the ROI threshold has changed, have I moderated and potentially reduced the intensity of spend on areas that are low ROI, try to do that. And then with people, it's the same thing. If people are spending a lot of time on activity that isn't useful, cut that. And so, again, I think there's a lot navigable. I think a lot of the greatest companies, certainly greatest startups, have been formed in times like this, in part because most important for folks who are hiring folks out of FANG and the large companies. If the cost of their equity or if their equity package is reduced because the stock price has gone down, it means that you are much more competitive. So that's great. That's an advantage. You can be nimble, but just making sure that you are thinking about that, the cost side and the ROI side of the equation, I think is really the biggest thing that's happening right now in the market.
Yeah, and I know a lot of my founder friends obviously use Ramp a lot for this. Like right now, they're very, very scrutinizing of some of these costs, right? Or a lot of these costs. Speaking of the market conditions and companies coming out of it, I know you guys, I don't know if everybody knows this, Ramp, it was really kind of the beginning of the pandemic when things did not seem that great that you came out and launched. What was that like? Because a lot of these founders right now are probably thinking the same thing. Like, we want to launch now, or we're about to be in this situation where it feels like things are kind of not going well. Yeah, what was it like for you guys getting out there?
It's so the history was, so we launched the company publicly in February 2020 with this idea of we want to have this card that helps you spend less. And that was still the days of WeWork and Uber, growth at all costs. And so people were like, that's a cool idea, thanks, and kept going. A week later, we're based in New York. Half the office got sick. We weren't really sure why. And 3 weeks later, we really figured that out. It turned out that, COVID was a thing. And April 2020 was a terrifying moment for a lot of people, and I think especially, our business is we extend terms out, and companies pay us back, and we're like, wow, these funds may not come back, and we need to be really thoughtful around all that. What I would say though is it created a lot of changes in the market that we were able to, because we were small and nimble, really move against. And so first, in some ways, we were very lucky. The value proposition of spend less went from a nice idea to actually this could help us save headcount or extend our runway. And so that accelerated us, and we positioned and really built out a lot of our savings capabilities for companies. Next, this idea of saving time became much more important. And the advantage that, let's say, the American Expresses would have of the world of sit in our lounges, we're going to be point multipliers on restaurants, on all sorts of stuff, was no longer relevant. But what was having the ability to handle expenses in a remote environment, to save time. And so we, in many ways, pivoted deeper into what really was the hole in the market, and that helped us kind of slingshot past others in the market. And I guess what I would say, for folks now, I think a lot of the reason, whether you look at like the Airbnbs, the Ubers, Stripes too, I think we're founded kind of in the shadow of the financial crisis. One of the big, first there was ways that the world had changed that they were able to go and active on. And I think that's happened, but many companies still haven't internalized. They're dealing with their cost structures. They're dealing with old needs and paradigms in a maybe growth at all costs, money is free world. And even though it'd be nice to be able to raise more with the same revenues, contribution, profit, you actually can right size and position yourself very well for the present state of the world. And next, I guess what I would say is, if you sort of are keeping these ideas in mind of channeling what's going to be this asymmetric outcome, how can you yield outsized benefit, recognize ways that the world has subtly shifted, others haven't internalized yet, and act on that. That's how you, relative basis, speed ahead and stand out in the market.
Yeah, and the point you brought up about hiring, I hope it's not lost on everybody here. This is something we hear a lot from kind of people who've been through this before. This is a really interesting time right now because you could get some amazing talent at probably a better cost structure, which is really interesting, right?
Totally. And I think there's a bunch of ways to think about it. First, just often if, we compete a lot in the fairly competitive engineering, product design markets, and the way that large companies will often structure their offers, they'll say, here's the base salary, here's your equity package, and by the way, your equity is worth at current stock prices $100,000, $500,000 over 4 years, and it would be struck based off the stock is at $100 a share. Suddenly, if the value of the stock has dropped by 75%, it means that you have a lot of employees who are sitting there thinking, what am I here for? I've got some stuff that are underwater. Does this make sense? And to actually go and make that back, it's really far. It's far. Next, it's a question of relative return. Well, it's certainly not easy to make a company sincerely worth on the market, whether it's 10 million, 100 million, a billion, you name it. Going from, for some of these large companies, 100 billion or $1 trillion falling down to 300, that is an exceptional and extraordinary amount of market cap to make up the difference. And, maybe for seed and series A companies, maybe before, maybe it's at a 10 million, 20, 50 cap. Now maybe it's at a 7 or a 40 or a 30. When you think about the difficulty of going from, let's say, a 7 to a 50, or let's say a $7 million company, at a 30 versus a 300 to a trillion, It's on a percentage basis, approximately, it's quite similar, but one is certainly much more possible to do. And so when you're competing at the early stages for core members of your team, your pitch of, look, we're not building this for next year, we're building this for many, many years. And you can own a portion of the company, a large build out over time. You just can have such advantages on, first, the other offers are just not as compelling as they used to be. It's not so much money that people can't, be so irresponsible walking from it. And next, a chance to make up the difference on a relative basis. It just lends to a compelling pitch. And I think at the end of the day, all startups are people. And so I think that for folks early and folks who are thoughtful, I think this can be one of the most extraordinary times to hire, I think in years, actually. It's exciting.
That's very exciting. Yeah, I know that's something that I'm sure a lot of the founders are constantly thinking of, is how do we get the best people on to come to us, right, versus somewhere else. Well, speaking of people, I know a lot of the questions that I've been getting about what people want to know from you is, you talk about velocity and performance on teams, right? Well, first of all, how do you think about performance and velocity? Do you kind of use those words together, or what is velocity, the way you describe it?
Describe it. Totally. So I think of like velocity minimum is really is like this notion of like, with a given period of time, how much are you able to produce or to an effect and outcome? And so one of the quirks or subtleties of Ramp is, on our first bird deck, we just put like, what day is it? I think it was like the 132nd day of the company. We put it in part because we were like embarrassed. We're like, we're only 4 months old. Don't grade us too hard, board members, for what we've done. But we stuck with it. And 2 months later, when we met, we said, okay, it's been another 60 days. What have we done with these 60 days? We look 2 months later with this next set of 60 days, what was done? And it was not to like navel gaze and say it's day whatever, reporting for duty. It's more to say, like, with these 60 days, same period of time, same resources, did we produce more, did we do less? And the goal is, with each incremental period of time, figure out one, similar to asymmetric outcome point earlier, can we cut the energy we're expending that isn't yielding the results, and then instead focus on the higher ROI and get more done. I think many folks here, maybe YC founders, I think a lot of folks, they've sort of written the book around a lot of this, but this notion of like grow 10% every week is very similar fundamentally. And the idea was, if you have some clear focus or goal that you're trying to hit, and you constrain the problem, you only have a week. It allows you to start to make trade-offs and figure out, how do we, what has almost certain likelihood, how can we go with the least energy, hit that and beat that. And of course, the goal gets 10% harder, and you kind of find your way up and do it. But I think it's really about setting a clear goal, constraining the time period of time, and then trying to, with each progressive period, go faster. And if you can do that, that's sort of what results in sort of the exponential curve that people always hope to and want to say, look at our curve, it's up and to the right, is one. The only caveat that I would say there is, like, that paradigm works really well when you kind of know or have a rough sense there's, we're out here, we're selling something and working. I do think that for teams to be able to go really fast, which for most companies is most of their life, I still think it's setting the time to first separate out, one, be open, be thinking before you kind of hit, all systems go and we're going to start selling stuff. Like, it is fine to do research, to be pushing on stuff early on. And next, to, even within your stack, we optimize a lot of how we build. A lot of our team go-to-market teams, like, they operate very quickly on sprints, and it's really about how many features can we ship as quickly as possible with impact. There are subsets of our teams too. For example, parts of our engineering stack is related to credit card transactions. It's not okay if one day your Ramp card just doesn't work. And so with that, we optimize for completeness, low latency, kind of perfection. And so what I'd say is, leave yourself some room to make sure that what you're optimizing fits the nature of the problem. In general, I think most problems can be solved with speed and momentum, but there are a few sets where I would carve it out from this philosophy.
Yeah, it sounds like the core, really understanding what the core of your business is. It's kind of critical to see what do we need to spend most of our time on, and what can we kind of move a little bit faster on. Is there some, so, you mentioned the credit card transactions, obviously your ramp. Is there some folks are wondering, so, product, there's been a lot written about how do you kind of develop a very quickly moving product organization and do it in sprints. How about sales and marketing? Like, have you found velocity, how people can have velocity there or figure out what works best? I know you brought up the Reddit example from Paris. Is there something that maybe Ramp or elsewhere that you've seen where it's like, oh, that's how you figure out what the right channel is, and then go for it?
100%. All the time. And this was like, for me, like a big part of the journey with Ramp too, because Paris was a consumer savings app where the LTV was like $20 for like a customer. We were very, like, you could not have anyone door-to-door sales. It was all about marketing. And so early on, a lot of the journey where I banged my head against the wall a lot was like, how do we, one, work with sales, appreciate what they can really do well, and then separate it out. And so first, just, crash course, like one, we've made all sorts of mistakes. One, which I'll say on sales specifically, is like, the best salespeople do want to get paid for overperformance, just as people who are starting companies want to get paid for, if you deliver an outsized outcome, asymmetric outcome, and creating equity value, you should be an owner and you'll participate in that. In sales, the paradigm is, well, you should make quota. So don't try to get too cute and like not compensate people for, if they sell twice as much, they should be able to make twice as much. So like, if you haven't kind of spent a lot of time researching going into just design of comp plans, do that. Next, you can sort of talk about the paradigm with it. And so we figured out that Ramp, by and large, from end to end of someone hearing about it, taking a first call to closed and using Ramp, that period can be anywhere from like self-serve is pretty instant to on the long end, 30 days for most small and mid-market. For enterprise, maybe it's 60. Something that a lot of quota plans will do is they'll say like, all right, we're going to set quota based on quarters. And then you hear people at the end of quarter rush. A lot of our periods are actually based, we constrained it down to the month. And we separated duties once we started to understand what worked. And so for SDs, it's about meeting booked, or sales development representatives. For account executives, it's about dollar estimated spend close, and it resets every month. There's sort of, we expect if you're seeing this many leads, you're making this many calls, this is what it's going to be. If you way overperform it, amazing. You can make a lot more. And then account managers, it's about one, onboarding, supportive features, and then two, as companies are growing, kind of that share. And I guess it's all to say, it comes back to designing and really understanding. There are certain inputs that matter more. It turned out that those things that we're optimizing are actually the inputs to our business equation, to our model. And so trying to organize people's efforts around the inputs and their outputs tied to the inputs that drive our business, and then align incentives, constrain the problem, and make it easier to do the job. So hopefully that was clear and helpful in terms of like how we do things and why. That certainly extends in other groups, but for sales specifically, that's somehow we think about it.
No, that's great. That's really tactical, and that's something I've really heard that often, kind of going into just what are the tactics, right? How do you think about comp plans and aligning the team? Well, so going back all the way to the beginning. So now let's say you have these teams and you have obviously a lot more employees. What was it like for these first few? Some of these founders are just starting, right? Like your first 5, right? What is it that you're looking for that said, okay, we know we need velocity. Like, what are the characteristics you're kind of looking for in those first few?
Oh, totally. So I would think about first, like when you were looking at like, do I join this company? Like maybe it was college, high school, now like different businesses, and you're looking at your next company. What do you, as like a job candidate or someone who potentially could be on the job market, like do? And maybe you'll look at the company itself. But very often one of the steps that comes into it is, one, are there people or you look at LinkedIn and you try to say like, wow, are these people great? And there are some companies you just look at the LinkedIn and you're like, it looks fine. Or others, and you look at the profiles of people and your jaw just drops. You're like, whoa, like what is going on at this company? Like these people look brilliant. They look uniquely qualified. And it gives you the sense of like, with or without me, this company is going to work, or I think it's exciting. And a lot of your job as a founder is like, how do you create this idea? And so Keith Verboy, who's one of our board members, has this notion of a concept of central casting in producing movies. imagine you're a movie producer and you want to sell the next Top Gun. You're like, wow, well, if we got like Tom Cruise, if we got these other people would have to see the movie. They're perfect for it. It's there. In many ways, a startup is kind of like that. You've got this business plan and idea, you're going after this opportunity, but a lot of this is bringing people together. And so for our first 5, we said, okay, well, the hole in the market was there was no great product and engineering driven companies, we thought, at least in the card and expense space. And, we wanted to prioritize that. And so we had a lot of ex-founders. We have Calvin, who graduated top of his class from MIT in 2.5 years. Pablo, who's early at Lyft, was at Google. Viral, similar thing, was going from WWDC from when he was like 14 years old. Like all these different people of like, one would be incredible on their own, but 2, like looked extraordinary and had a unique spike. Not perfect. They all have real gaps. I do too, but really strong spikes. And I think if you do that, it's not just one enabling you to go after the goals you're trying to, but second, it makes hiring the next set simpler, because your ability to close, your excitement, people want to follow. And so trying to sort of think about what's going to make your company, one, successful in the first place, but give this feeling almost of, if you pull it off, it's going to feel more and more likely that outcome is going to take place.
It's almost like asymmetric outcomes there. It's like you're not just hiring, Patrick likes to say, you're not just hiring that one person. You're kind of hiring all the people that either they will bring in or that they will inspire to come to the company. And so it's just, there's so much leverage in those first few. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we have a lot of questions that are coming in from the audience, and so I'm going to try to get to a few here. Oh, okay. Here's one thing that's a little related. So let's talk a little about culture. So the question is, how do you build that culture velocity at Ramp? Or yeah, how do you build that culture velocity at Ramp so it maintains it as it scales? Like, how do you think about that?
Super good question. And I would say often, where I think a lot of culture doesn't work, where like often people early on will try to do value exercises and they like write down, here's what's nice, or they'll read from different stuff and put like values, put it up on like a wall, and then it just like sits. And people are like, oh, what are the values that are on the wall? Nobody really knows. And like, I think it was something that Jeff Bezos basically required of, like, if people couldn't name it and if people weren't actually saying it, it was deleted. And often a lot of this question of values was reductiveness and trying to get at what actually represents what people would say and what people sincerely feel about your company is one. Next, a lot of our focus, you've heard it with like this idea, we counted the days, we looked at the in between. A lot of the focus was we're going to work hard. We think that incentives are misaligned, cards and expense offers should help people spend less, but we need to move quickly. We need every week to count. And so a lot of this was around managing to the inputs and sort of producing a lot and sort of like racing and seeing, could we put out more? Could we kind of out kind of go and work each other? And so that became a lot of the culture. And so even later, once the pandemic, really got kicked off and we couldn't all be together, and we made it really easy to see what were we both shipping, what was the pace of delivery, what was getting done, and also the outputs. And so a lot of this was just on coming together, setting the goals, running through sprints, and at the end measuring that, and then taking a day to kind of consider how could we move and like get a little bit faster as one. So that's first. On some of the, so I think a lot of culture is just really what you're about, what you do. And so I wouldn't try to separate it from like, these are the lifestyle things. And then on some of the lifestyle stuff, I would say just make time for people to see each other, actually invest in that. That probably sounds like a little bit trite and happy to, with the follow-up question, we can go a bit deeper in what that looks like, but like, do make time to like actually see each other, get to know each other outside of just which you produce, make time for spontaneity. And you'll find like there are a lot of quirks, like Ramp is very different company than Paribus than Capital One. There are things that make you and your team, it changes with each person, and like try to write things down, bring things out, and make time for that too. If you can do those two, like a lot of the rest takes care of itself in my view. Yeah,
that's great. That is great. It's something always people think about, what is culture? And it's something you can't quite fully describe it it just becomes, right? You kind of set the culture, and it's a huge part of what you do as a founder. One thing this is a great question that I've also heard a lot is, with all the fluctuation in the market conditions over the last few years, being able to reconcile what's happening with your business within the current macro trends, it's becoming really important. How do you get underneath the headlines to figure out what it all means for your business? To what extent is that process intuitive versus data driven?
It's a super good question. And so what I would say is like, in theory, a management team, a co-founding team, hopefully a lot of your alpha is like you, or the return that you can generate uniquely is like you have instincts or insights about the market that guide and help you find and orient the right set of questions. There's an immense amount of data out there, some with very high signal. And if you're just trying to check the data to like run and see what to do, it's very hard. And so I think where the instinct comes in is trying to ask the right questions, orient around what are the right things to focus on, the goals, and set your optimization engine in sort of focus. So create the focus and try the exercise. Because with whether you have 10 people, $100,000, $1 million, whatever it is, you only have a limited amount of time and money before things run out. And so a lot of what you're trying to do is run the right experiments to get to the next stage, get to something that people want to invest in further or shows profitability is first. Next, I think once you've organized the question, this worldview, I do think that then it comes a lot of like running a lot of experiments quickly, being really open-minded, of like having a view, but seeing what the data is actually telling you and drive. I think macro is like important. It gets much more important at large scale. I think that for most small companies, I think it's important to know, is this a large market? Would a lot of people use it? But actually, I think it's more of if you can, even small sets of companies that are really using it, actually, growing in use, actually paying for it, that's fine. You don't need to solve the entire macro. I think macro is something that gets much more important after like Series B through C, D. But I think earlier, I wouldn't overthink it. I would be spending much more time on, could you find customers today? Could you, do something next week and really shorten and constrain the problem? That'd be largely how I think about it.
Yeah, just make a few people love you. It's always, I know it's so I see systemically. So I think there's actually a lot of questions about sellers. This is like, people are really excited to hear some of these more tactics around go-to-market, around sales, around hiring right now, especially, right? Because they are going to bring in the revenue. So I guess one question you may have touched on it a bit is, what's your advice on hiring a great sales leader early on in a startup's life cycle? It seems to be one of the most crucial hires given their importance in driving revenue. Like, what are you looking for in a salesperson that early on?
So I think there's a few stages of it. So very early on, counterintuitively, I actually think you want someone who's able to like, first, I think great salespeople in general, even at late stage high production, are very good at listening. I think the relative trade-off becomes like earlier on, I think the ability to do almost like customer success, bizarrely, I actually think is somewhat more important. It's very hard to build a product with super strong product market fit unless you are really understanding and acutely aware of where the product has holes, actually understanding what's the workflow. Your sales team in some ways will spend more time, if you're not careful, than like anyone else in your organization. And so having someone early on that's attuned to understanding the nature and is sincerely interested in the problems of customers is important. And so for us, that person was someone named Charlie Ma. He was the first salesperson at Plaid, then he was the first business hire at Ramp, now at a company called Alloy. What made him great in part was this focus on customer success, and that passed through the product team, and what we grew every month. The insights that he offered allows us months later to start growing much faster because we effectively shaved off the rough edges of the products that we could go and find fast product market fit. Later, I think the importance is much more around really understanding the data, the operations, the funnel to break some things down, but it knows how to drive the pace and the intensity and help separate out what's will, what's skill. Like, are people, working hard? Do they have the will to win? Are they bringing the right culture, the focus, the energy to kind of go out and like, no, there's money out there. There's people who need our help. Let's go and like find the right customers. And then the skill to understand, monitor calls, look at collateral, help train people, get people to, and create the culture where people can really learn what works and up level together. And so I still think that question of learning is important, but that's what subtly shifts. And last, what I would say is, I think the importance of understanding where demand comes from and how to create demand is increasingly related to sales. Sometimes you'll find people who are like growth sales early on in it. Often you can find really good background in people understand like where are leads, who are the types of customers that are receptive, and then later can channel to make sure your sales team is spending time with people likely to convert, find the signals, and can go and build an ecosystem. So kind of a long-winded answer. I think there's a few phases of it, but those are the types of personalities that I find work well as you're phasing up.
Yeah, and I mean, even at Stripe, we see that for even self-serve, right? There's some channels that seem to be producing the most outcomes for you, whether it's geography, whether it's a certain subscription model, whatever it is. And it's kind of doubling down on that and paying attention to the details is always really helpful. Another question is, this is interesting. What is one possibly contrarian thing that your company or team does in terms of process? For example, waterfall versus agile.
Interesting. You got to have Jeff, who's our head of product on. He can be more. I mean, I would say that for us, we don't like we do not follow any like agile waterfall like Kanban like process in its full form. We take things that we like and modify, like have like modifications of basically everything. So there's probably like classicists of any one of these philosophies who would be like horrified with like some of like the process we have. We actually don't have even a unified process, even though we all operate sort of like on loose sprints. And there are certain things, like I actually think a lot of even the ways that we'll set prioritization can be modified in the team. What I would say though is fit your process, like have some standard, and if you deviate, know why, but sincerely be open to deviating and have alternative processes in how you as a company ship and develop your software. So some level, like a base case, if people can prove the new version is better, do it, is our view. But yeah.
Cool. And then, okay. So, here's one around, a lot of founders think about is like, what do you outsource basically, whether it's engineering, whether it's sales, whether it's designing a marketing campaign. How do you think about what to build internally versus what you can use an agency for, or where can you place your dollars in a way that can give you the most asymmetric outcome? So yeah, what do you outsource versus what do you keep?
I love this question. I think it's like a super good, because like when you think about now, like it's never been more possible to, very quickly get a business, like whether it's hosting on AWS, accepting payments, issuing cards out, super rapidly with partner like Stripe, to, so many SaaS vendors that can help with areas. I think actually where a lot of people create returns and are able to just run a lot faster is really being super thoughtful about the tooling, the process APIs you can plug into. And if you look at Ramp, even down below it, like we're in many ways almost like a layer cake. There are certain parts of our stack which we do all have internally because it has strategic value, data value, or we should not externalize it. But your competition really is like, if you're, let's say it's possible, like if we in-housed and built everything, worked directly with Visa, with MasterCard, did everything, maybe we could make some extra bips. But when you think about the value of time versus like Stripe's issuing API is there, it's great, you can issue and be working right away. Is it really worth it? You can actually quantify it. You can put on a spreadsheet and say like, how much time, how much cost, and is the relative trade-off? And you'll find that's actually true through lots and lots and lots of parts of your stack. And part of what helped Ramp run really, really quickly is we will work with lots of APIs, partners throughout, and a lot of underneath Ramp is lots of services stitched together in one unified, simple to use product. And like, that's how we create. So that's probably more true of consumer and business oriented products, maybe less true of infrastructure providers. But I would argue like it's part of the reason why startups can go faster and go from like $0 to $100 million in revenue in like 2 years from launch, like that can happen and only is possible, I think, now because you can work and partner with others. So what I would say is trying to, in the same way as we're looking for asymmetric outcomes, be serious about looking, is the internal cost lower than working with external? Is the strategic cost higher? Very rarely is that true. Sometimes it is. Build there. If it's not, don't worry about it. Next, so you can take bets with other people, have people take bets on you. That's a great way to build, because you'll bring each other up together. And so find partners where you can have unfair advantages because you're building and each want to help each other win. Focus that way. Yeah, hopefully that's like a helpful framework, but we actually tend to do it a lot and I recommend it.
For sure. Yeah. Apologies for the siren in the background if you can hear it. So there's one more question, and it is related to Ramp. So if someone asked, if I'm an early stage founder, I have no time to figure out managing expenses. It seems like I need to, based on what you're talking about. What are some of the tactical things that you've seen founders do using Ramp, or maybe things that wouldn't be intuitive to help them manage those expenses? Or basically, yeah, like how are they using Ramp or tools like Ramp to manage that? What have you seen for founders early stage?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it all stems from this similar view, which is like, there are just things that are going to make or break your business, and some things that are going to be like, you kind of need to do, but sort of can quickly become a giant waste of time. And I think that for many companies, you probably will not build $1 billion company by like, in-housing and having some super custom stack. I think having tools that can automate and take away from like one for your employees, like make it dead simple to like submit receipts, or better yet, like pull receipts automatically, book accounting, and like reduce the time spent there so you can actually use the time on things that generate like your growth, your higher margins, your unfair advantages. And so in part, that's why we're trying to build Ramp. We help the average company through our automation spend 3.5% less, close their books 8 days sooner each month. Some of the power tricks which I really recommend, it's one, set card policies for different departments where you have, you can set based on certain card rules, what are limits, departments, locations. So at the end of the month, you can know where to account and book and monitor who's spending what. Next, some of the integrations. We launched a Gmail integration with Amazon, Lyft. We find that for companies that use all these integrations, I think 80% of receipts come in automatically. That means like you don't even need to turn in receipts. The average receipt is turned in 30 minutes after, and so we make it very easy for employees to turn things in. Next, you can set rules based on it. You can start to say, if the expenses are made here or at this merchant, here's what should go in our general ledger, and you can connect it. And effectively, a lot of the pre-accounting work you can get done there. And so I'm happy to share out more rules there. Next, we also have a procurement service. If you go to ramp.com/procurement, you can see it, but we can help negotiate contracts for you on your behalf. We automate bill payments. If you have like 10 bill payments in a month, just upload them, come back in an hour. Everything is perfectly coded. Ramps, we have effectively AI on the OCR to match by quantity, department, description to where it should go in your general ledger and accounting. And if there's specific areas too, my DMs on Twitter are also open, just at Glyman. And I'd be happy to, one, put you in touch with some of our, some experts on our team, or even to opine on like, all right, that's where you're spending time. Here's what I would do to help cut that down. Hopefully that's helpful.
Very helpful. Yeah. And it for everybody, we did put some more resources in the chat about Ramp for startups. It's a question I get. Every founder I know uses Ramp, so I'm sure they know what they're doing in terms of helping founders manage their spend. But yeah, as Eric said, if you want to contact him, just DM him on Twitter. It's Glyman on Twitter. Maybe you can put that in the chat as well, or in the follow-ups. And then Eric, yeah, Stripe, everyone here is always talking about Ramp and excited about you guys. Ramp is kind of managing the spend. Stripe, obviously excited about helping you make more revenue. And so combined, it's a business, and we can get some profitability. So yeah, thank you, Eric, so much for coming. Hopefully everybody had an amazing time. DM Eric going afterwards, and we'll go from there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone joining, and hope this was great. And thanks, Ashwin, too. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Take care.